Sure. Gotcha. Hey, man, how are you?
I'm good, Bryan. How you doing?
Good, fine. We'll honor your time request here.
Thank you.
Okay, as soon as all right, here we go. Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and the author of the Big Mac blog, it's Mac Engel. How you doing, sir?
I'm really well, Bryan. How are you doing?
I'm good. Still a little jet-lagged from being in California for a week, and I leave, and, you know, it looks like the TCU people are wanting to draw and quarter you there.
Yeah, that was a pretty interesting day on Friday afternoon. I had everything lined up. I had written a nice little thing about Texas A&M and Eric Hyman and the SEC, and then I find out that Casey Paha has admitted to the cops that he tried cocaine and X, and then he failed a student drug test. Sometimes it does not pay to be honest.
Well, what made him decide to be honest in the first place?
Well, I think when you go back and look at the timeline of the whole thing, he failed the drug test back on February 1st, and he failed it for marijuana in his system. And then 2 weeks later, then that's when the drug bust happened, and the 4 football players who were associated with that drug bust that included, I think, of about 17 TCU students. Those 4 players were kicked off. One of them was linebacker Tanner Brock, who was Casey Paha's roommate. Now, all this stuff was in the police affidavit when Paha was interrogated, I guess, or interviewed by the police. But that affidavit was not made available until the whole thing wrapped up, which was about 2 or 3 weeks ago when Brock was sentenced to a pretty minor inappropriate punishment for his crime, community service, etc., time served. But the Paha revelation wasn't revealed until that affidavit was made available. Good job by the TCU publication, 360 TCU360.com. They FOI'd it, and then they read the whole thing, and then the whole thing included Paha admitting to cops that he failed that drug test, which would not have come out, and that he used cocaine, and that he used ecstasy, which was not part of the drug test failure. He just admitted it. So then, you know, TCU goes into, I would say, spin control.
Yeah.
And then I wrote something, and I very much stand by it. I wrote that I thought he should have been suspended for 4 games. And it doesn't mean I think Casey's a bad guy at all. It doesn't mean I don't think Gary Patterson's a bad guy. I just think in this particular case, Bryan, in light of the fact that you've got a drug bust, in light of the fact that you've got a perception problem, even though it may have been blown out of proportion by the media, I think, and then in light of the fact that you've got a completely unrelated, only in name, total breakdown of enabled parental behavior and guidance, leadership guidance at Penn State, I think on this one, you have to look like you are creating more of a no-tolerance policy instead of what we have here, which very much looks like, hey, okay, we're going to follow university guidelines, which they did, and essentially the quarterback of the TCU football team does not basically get punished at all.
So, and what did Patterson have to say about this when he was asked whether he was going to take any kind of disciplinary action against Paha?
Gary called me, or I talked to Gary on Friday night for about 45 minutes. It was a very, very good conversation, Bryan. I liked Gary before. I like him even more now. Gary's point was the guy failed the university drug test, and we acted according to the university's guidelines. And if you look in the student handbook, which I did, the TCU student handbook, the football team did not make it. The university didn't make an exception for its starting quarterback. Now and I don't believe he was exploiting this, what appears to be a loophole, because it doesn't say in there anything about failing a drug test and then admitting to the cops that you tried 2 highly illegal narcotics. You just, and then you do understand it, Bryan. It's very black and white. If you fail a drug test for marijuana, this is what you've got to do, including seeing counseling. Casey's done that. There's nothing in there, nor would there ever be anything in there that says if you admit to the cops that you tried cocaine and ecstasy, then you've got to do X, Y, and Z. My point is, this is a PR thing, this is a perception thing, and in this day and age, this looks really bad. And what you're doing now is you're creating a perception that, okay, we followed university guidelines, yeah, but we're going to look the other way on this one. And I asked Gary point blank, and I said, are you going to suspend him? He said, no, why would I? I've acted in with the university's guidelines. He did. It's not like they made an exception, and this is not a normal drug failure case.
Right, and it looks bad.
I think that's just it, Brian. I think it just looks bad. Now, I know, and I've just been getting shredded for it. Oh, my God, did I get shredded for it. And I told Gary point blank, I said, okay, and Brian, I told Gary, had he not called me, I was going to be much harsher with what I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
After he talked to me, I changed a lot. I softened my opinion somewhat.
Right.
Because I do believe Gary acted within the guidelines. He did. But at the same time, it looks bad. It just looks bad. And nationally, I think this is not, and Gary knows this is not going to go away for the entire season.
Not at all. Not at all.
And I don't think and Brian, I've talked to Casey. He's a good guy. This is not a bad guy. He just sounds a little young and a little naive and like a college kid. And I had been hearing things of anybody around TCU, Brian, had been hearing things about Casey that were not necessarily flattering for a while. And I kind of dismissed it. I just said, that's just hearsay, conjecture. You know how that goes, Brian. You hear sort of, big fish stories, and you just sort of learn to blow them off. But on this one, there was smoke and there was fire, literally. And I just thought in this particular case, some action was required instead of, hey, we followed university protocol.
Okay, so what kind of impact do you think that has on Pahal, on Patterson, and on the football team going into this new season, their first year in the Big 12?
It's a distraction. There's no getting around it. I think Gary knows what he's getting ready to do is going to be hard. This is not the Mountain West. They're going to be, it's one thing to say, hey, well, we beat Iowa State this year. We beat, like they did 4 or 5 years ago in the Houston Bowl. Okay, you're playing Oklahoma, then you're playing West Virginia, then you're playing Kansas State, then you're playing Oklahoma State, then you're playing Texas. This is hard. This is going to be hard. And you and I both know he needs Casey Pahal to win.
Sure.
And I don't think he's, the thing, Brian, and I'm out of town. This is something I want to say. I told Gary on Friday night, listen, I'm scheduled to leave tomorrow morning with my daughter to go on a vacation. If you've got a problem with anything that I write, feel free to call me and cuss me out. I'm not going to be able to be there at the press conference on Sunday. Mm-hmm. And because, as you know, Brian, that looks kind of cowardly that I would duck out. That I'd write something like that and duck out. And that was not my, selfishly, I'm just sort of like, hey, I wasn't trying to duck that out. Because and Gary was a total pro about it. He understands my job and I understand his. But as far as it affects what's going to come, he's going to get these questions.
Sure.
And I think, Brian, they've told Casey, don't take any of these questions. You know how college coaches are getting these days. They lord over this stuff more than the NFL does. So I think they're going to do that. But I think Gary's going to get them all year. And then the problem is, what's going to happen? Because it's going to happen. They're going to lose some games.
Sure.
Not because they're bad, just because they're playing more good teams. And when a good team plays another good team, a good team's going to win. And I just think it's going to be harder. I think it just makes it a little bit harder. And like I said, it creates a perception, and that's going to be enhanced if they lose by whomever, fans, media, whatever. They're going to say, well, it's a distraction. This whole thing went south in February with the drug bust, blah, 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 blah. It may not even be completely accurate. Hell, it probably won't be. There's going to be seeds of truth to it, and it's just going to look bad, and it's going to make it harder.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that. In the last,
but I want to ask you, Brian.
Please.
You've been around longer than what would you have done?
As far as
Casey,
from Patterson's standpoint,
if you were the head coach and you had a player in this particular case, what would you have done?
Here's the deal. Because I'm a big LSU fan. Okay, full disclosure, and I watched the same kind of thing happen. Literally 2 weeks before LSU was supposed to open against Oregon, they get into the big bar brawl, and Jordan Jefferson, the starting quarterback, gets arrested, okay? And it infuriated me as a fan to think that your senior quarterback who is supposed to be the leader of your team, has broken curfew, has gotten into a bar fight 2 weeks before they're playing the then #1 Oregon Ducks. I would have suspended him. I don't know if I'd have suspended him 4 games, but I guarantee I would have suspended him some games. And as it was, Les suspended him 4 ball games. Now, my problem with it was as the season went along, Les gave him back the job, and I don't think he ever really earned the job back. And I think that when it was all said and done, my opinion was he cost him the national championship, and I think lack of leadership was as much a problem as anything. And I think that then we saw later on the Honey Badger got in trouble the same way. I just think that if you don't nip it in the bud, then you leave yourself open for more of these kind of problems. And so I think from Patterson's standpoint, I understand what he's saying, but at the same time, I think that you got to watch these little things, because these little things start growing into big things if you don't show a zero tolerance policy for things. And he already had the issue with the 4 guys who got kicked off the team. Now you got Pa Hall. I think he had to take some kind of disciplinary action, and should have. And we'll see what kind of impact that has on his team and his program this year. And you said it's a distraction. It's something they're going to deal with all year long.
Would you have suspended him, Bryan?
I think he should have been suspended for at least a game or 2.
Yeah, and the more I've thought about it, I was like, 4 is a lot. That's a fourth of the season gone. I think what's surprising is that there was no extra type of disciplinary action against him.
I mean, and I get it. He admitted it, and I understand all the university issues, but again, if you want to send a clear message to the public and to your football team that, this thing got out of control in the off season with the 4 guys and the scandal there, and I like the way Patterson handled that, and I think that he should have taken some strong measures against Pa Hall to show some consistency, okay? And I don't know that 4 games was necessary, but I definitely would have thought that maybe 2 ball games would be at least to send a message that, hey, he didn't get caught by us, but he admitted it. Now he's got to pay some kind of consequences.
See, and that's the bizarre thing to me, is that, and I asked Gary, Gary was saying things to me. I said, why would he say this? And Gary said, I don't know why he would say it. And I said, because he said it because he was scared,
sure,
and it's the truth. And that doesn't make him a bad guy. He's a 20-year-old kid.
Sure, made a mistake.
It doesn't, absolutely. And it doesn't make him, that's who this is going to be for the rest of his life. We've had presidents who've admitted to drug use.
Yes, and a lot of other things.
Yeah, no doubt. So I just think in terms of the reaction, and I understand some of the reaction to it is, this is our quarterback, Gary's handle, but at the same time, you said it. A, it's going to be a distraction, and B, it could sort of lead to other things, because if there is another thing, then this is just one more thing.
Listen, hey, Mac, I'm a firm believer in the Barney Fife rule of life. Nip it, nip it, nip it in the bud. You have to.
Cool, but I think you're right.
I know it sounds crazy, but he is in a very difficult situation, and it is a dilemma that I'm glad I don't have to face, and I'm glad I'm not Gary Patterson, and now we just have to sit back and see what happens, if he's let this thing get beyond control, or if he'll be able to rein it back in and keep it from becoming a festering problem with the TCU program. And in the meantime, congratulations on being, named the president of the Booster Club. I'm very proud.
Yeah, I have been. Unfortunately, when they named me president, donations seem to have dropped to an all-time low, but I'm sure that's totally unrelated.
Well, you're supposed to make up the difference, I think is what it is.
Yeah, that's right.
Good luck with that.
Thanks.
Hey, Mac, thanks very much for coming on with us, man. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week on vacation, and we will talk to you next Monday.
And thanks a lot.
All right, buddy. Talk to you
later.
Mac Engel, the Big Mac blog and Mac's columns on the Fort Worth Star Telegram. You can see him all the time on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.